A poor man who oppresses the poor is like a driving rain which leaves no food. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we share together some thoughts starting from Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 3. A poor man who oppresses the poor is like a driving rain which leaves no food. A common theme in the scriptures is the complaint against the rich man who oppresses the poor. And this happens all the time. A rich man making himself richer by keeping the pressure on the poor. But this proverb is focusing on the poor man who, in his poverty, takes it out on other poor people, rather than having sympathy and understanding on them. Rather than working together, a poor person who oppresses another poor person is seen as particularly abhorrent. It's like a driving rain which leaves no food. It takes away even that which is there. The plight of the poor is a major concern in the scriptures, because God is the one who gives riches, but they are an opportunity for those who have to provide for those who have not. But many of us think that because we have, we are entitled to have, and we don't need to share. We have worked hard for what we have, and so we should enjoy it. Our modern society, the rich people of the world are travelling all around the world spending money on themselves. A huge part of the economy of the world is on trinkets and rubbish. This is a way of oppressing the poor. You don't allow the poor person to get out of his poverty by forcing him to make trinkets which you buy for a pittance. Recall Jesus' comments, "You have the poor with you always, and you can do good to them whenever you will." And so this is the complaint that the scriptures frequently have. In Psalm 72 we read, "He will bring justice to the poor of the people. He will save the children of the needy, and will break in pieces the oppressor." In Proverbs 14, "He who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honours him has mercy on the needy." That is, to have mercy on the needy is to honour God. He who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty. You can't really get rich by exploiting the poor, Solomon is saying. So do not rob the poor because he's poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. When Jesus came and declared his mission in Nazareth, as recorded in Luke chapter 4 verse 18, he quoted Isaiah saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the broken-hearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." And the gospel proclaimed to the poor is that when we have faith in God, we will enter into the eternal kingdom. The measure of greatness in that kingdom will not be the accumulation of gold and silver that we might have had on earth, but rather the faith and faithfulness we have had towards God. A strong principle that Jesus emphasized is that the first shall be last and the last first. In this world, the rich have privilege and the poor are disregarded and oppressed. But in the kingdom, it will be the poor of this world who have had faith in God, trusted God for their needs every day, who will be the ones who are honoured. While in the Old Testament, wealth was seen as a sign of God's blessing, we find in the New Testament that the majority of believers were poor people, those who were the servants and slaves. There were only a few who were rich, and those few who were rich sold their excess possessions and gave to the poor. The principle that Paul enunciated there was so that there would be equality. The challenge for the rich man is to give so that the poor is improved. Therefore, James commented, when a rich man comes into your assembly, don't give him the best seat and make the poor person sit at your feet, because that's dishonouring the poor, whom God honours. It's the rich who oppress you and drag you into court. So don't despise the poor person when you come into the assembly of God, because in the assembly of God, the oppressor is the one who is dishonoured. The poor person is honoured. As Jesus said, he's come to preach the gospel to the poor, a message of hope, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. People are oppressed, nations are oppressed, as well as individuals. But to come back to our proverb, the thing that Solomon is complaining about is a poor man who oppresses the poor is like a driving rain which leaves no food. We look for rain because rain is so valuable. But then if you have too much rain, then it destroys the crops, and it is not a blessing. The way that the Jewish people have survived, although they have been oppressed by the nations for 2,000 years, is by cooperating together, by helping one another. And Jesus announced the characteristic of the church was that all men will know that you are my disciples because you have love one for another. It is the principle of giving that Jesus taught. It's more blessed to give than to receive. When Jesus was amongst us, he came as a poor man. So those who followed him, who loved wealth, were not going to get very far. As he said, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He had divulged himself of all material possessions. Whatever wealth his family had, and Nazareth was a very poor village, he left with his mother and brothers as he went on his ministry. He was only able to pursue his ministry because others supported him. Others gave. Certain rich women contributed to providing for the needs of the apostles. And so those who come to Jesus thinking that they're going to get rich in the process, our riches are all in heaven, largely obtained by giving away any riches we might gain on earth. One of the complaints then in the New Testament was those who oppressed the poor in the sense that they established themselves as Christian teachers and demanded that they be paid to minister to the saints. But as I've noted, the majority of saints were poor people, and those who were seeking this position were also poor people, but they saw an opportunity by proclaiming themselves to be spiritual people and spiritual leaders to be able to exploit others who were vulnerable. This is abhorrent to God, which is why he has so strong a denunciation for the false prophets who speak and speak, but they don't know, Paul says, what they're talking about. The person who is to be a leader among God's people is to be the servant of all. The servant is totally committed to the well-being of those he is serving. For Jesus came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. It is the world's model that says, I will not help you unless you pay me first. Jesus came not to make himself rich at the expense of the poor, but to proclaim the gospel to the poor and the salvation of those who are oppressed. And we will be about his business if we are doing the same.